Good afternoon. I am discussing ethical leadership in athletic training, our formal leadership skills and ethics taught in the profession of athletic training. The purpose of the review was to examine whether a consensus existed between leadership and ethics that are vital skills to the practice of athletic training, and if formal education is needed to successfully implement them. A little background into athletic training, just to kind of set the tone. Athletic training is still considered an emerging profession, still new. It actually became an official profession in 1950 with the National Athletic Trainers Association. They formed the NATA then, and so basically that's when the profession was established. Then we were recognized by the American Medical Association as an allied health profession in 1990, which to some people that might seem a long time, but in reality, that is a very new profession compared to nursing, PT, OT, psychology, physicians. So we are still in the new stages. Three main themes emerged from my lit review: ethics and ethical issues, leadership exists in athletic training and needs formal education, and leadership in the professional practice, leadership in action. And so now I'm going to go through and discuss these each individual themes and talk about couple of the researchers, the main researchers in those areas. So one of the main themes throughout anyways is that little research exists in leadership or ethics, but specifically for ethics and ethical issues, ethics research and athletic training barely existed. So Caswell and Gold wanted to expand this research, and several other clinicians did too as well in ethical issues, but they were a big contribution. They actually recommend 20 hours of didactic and clinical instruction. So not only in the classroom, but in the clinical instruction with the preceptor, if ethics be integrated through athletic training throughout the duration of the curriculum. This cannot be learned or practiced in one setting. So one class of ethics, one class talking about leadership skills just will not be effective. It needs to be embedded within the curriculum throughout the whole curriculum and not just the classroom, into the practice as well. They actually had to do a Delphi study to develop the technique for this study to develop that as well. Swisher et al. Found that little information even existed concerning the ethical issues that athletic trainers were coming up against, and their study found that 154 specific ethical issues and 7 themes were identified. So there's might even be more identified in today's society due to more diversity and cultural sensitivity, but in 2009 those were found. So, and before that, there had not been any research that existed for what those ethical issues were. So now we've at least identified some ethical issues, identified the themes. So now what do we do with it? And so when we get into the other themes, we talk about how to integrate these into the curriculum, if they are integrated, if they're not, and the consensus. So it has been identified leadership does exist in athletic training and needs formal education. And I just talked about Coutts because he is one of the leading researchers in this. He actually came to Spalding last year and did a talk on leadership in athletic training and healthcare. So, but with what little research existed, he did determine leadership had been established in athletic training. It can be learned, and it requires formal education, and more research needs to be completed in the profession. Luckily, more research is being completed in the profession. A colleague of mine has actually submitted, and a manuscript was accepted on leadership in the curriculum of athletic training. December 2020, a leadership issue, special edition issue, is coming out in the Education Journal of Athletic Training, just focusing on leadership. So I'm very excited and hopeful that we will have a plethora of research. I can hopefully take my topic and build it. When I get to the conclusion, it might even be in that research, and I might have to shape it and go a different way. But I am excited that we are moving toward more research, more implementation, hopefully, of leadership and athletic training. education. So leadership in professional practice, basically highlighting some ideas or avenues where athletic trainers were really exhibiting leadership in professional practice. Leadership skills in traditional settings, of course, are important, but then when athletic trainers get into non-traditional settings, such as in the hospital, industrial setting, working with Cirque du Soleil, the ballet, they need very specific leadership skills to successfully perform their jobs, like even at a higher level than what a collegiate or secondary school athletic trainer would need. So that was a very interesting to find. And then Mazerol et al. Discussed that athletic trainers fighting for change and engaging in political issues for the betterment of their profession exhibited leadership skills as well. So not only are we continually exhibiting leadership skills in our practice, we are continually to advocate for the profession. Kentucky even has a Capitol Hill Day where athletic trainers are asked to go to the Capitol, advocate for the profession. The Kentucky Athletic Trainer Society has a contract with a lawyer to help with the lobbying of issues in athletic training, to help with our Practice Act, protecting the public. So these are all things that in our profession we have to continue to advocate for, and that is a show of leadership skills. So there was a surprise theme that came out of the Lit Review discussing gender struggles for women in athletic training. And it's definitely been something discussed in some papers written about in other ways, but it was interesting that this came about in my Lit Review. 2 articles noted a gender struggle within the literature, Mazerol and Easton and Crotius. And Mazerol and Easton talk about the women not taking leadership roles, especially either they're not offered or just don't want them in the Division I setting, or they're still the highest setting of leadership roles for women are in the Division II and III settings, but there's still, of course, more men in the leadership roles than the women. And by leadership roles, I mean head athletic trainer, director of athletic training services, those types of leadership roles. And so, due to work-life balance, winning at all costs at the higher levels, not being able to, motherhood was a struggle. It was highlighted and then Crotius et al. Talked about women reported they felt the pressure to prematurely return an athlete with a concussion more than men. So women are getting more pressure for unethical and even illegal actions than men are due to our gender. And another thing I found within the literature is we have to educate our women and have conversations with our women that we don't have to have with our men, per se. It's being recommended women have conversations with their coaches at the beginning of the season, set the ground rules, tell them you're not going to mother them, tell them you're not going to baby your athletes, whereas men do not have to have these types of conversations. And so that was interesting to examine that. And the same thing with the athletic trainers and the work-life balance. The one study by Mazerol and Easton identified men were married in the leadership roles. Women, it's hard for them to be married with children. Men can be married with children and have these leadership roles. So there is a gap there with gender struggles in athletic training. The gaps in the research identified, like I've said, research lacked in identifying how, when, and where athletic trainers learn their professional behaviors, and no education programs were found or stated to be implementing leadership skills and ethical behaviors in their curriculums. I am anticipating December 2020, though, that hopefully there will be a research study or two where it has been shown that these leadership behaviors are essential to athletic trainers in to get that translated to the education, and that we're teaching those to our students and we're embedding it, and then but we have to measure it, and I'll talk about that in a little bit too. So conclusions, the literature reflects that leadership and ethical behaviors are necessary for a professional athletic trainer, so we know they're necessary. And then a consensus was shown that formal education in athletic training education curriculums need to have leadership skills and ethical behaviors taught. And reflecting back to some of the other studies, it needs not to only be in one class, in a didactic setting, but embedded in multiple classes throughout the curriculum with the clinical preceptors being involved in this too. One thing I didn't highlight earlier is it has been shown that your clinical preceptor has just as much influence as your didactic, your classroom teacher. Because basically, when they go out and they see the athletic trainer practicing in practice, just like any other profession, nursing, OT, PT, that's who they aspire to be. That's who they want to role model after. That's who they want to act like. So that can be even another, when we talk about recommendations, like how to vet your preceptors to actually have the leadership skills you want them and professional behaviors you want them to have to instill within your students. And continued research lacked in identifying how, when, and where they learn that the profession has learned their behaviors. And no, like I said, no educational programs were found to be implementing these. When I went through my education, I went through what was called an internship route. I had 5 core classes. None of these classes included any type of administration, professional behaviors. It was all just basically learned in the clinical setting. And then the curriculum route, of course, they do have more um, professional behaviors, organization, administration, those type things. So it's interesting to find out where we have learned our behaviors and how we are educating the future of athletic training. So recommendations, research into athletic training leadership and ethics is lacking. It needs to be studied further. Specific leadership styles and ways to implement them into the curriculum weren't discussed. They need to be examined, like identify what leadership skills, styles are the most important to athletic training, how to embed them in a curriculum. And this can actually come from if a good enough research study can actually influence our accrediting body and our standards to say, okay, now these have to be embedded in the standards. And if they're in the standards, then the curriculums have to abide by them. So maybe one day that will happen. And then, of course, we do need a tool to examine if the leadership skills and ethical behaviors implemented are producing positive outcomes as well, and this probably will need to be created because one does not exist. As of now, I'm hoping December 2020, maybe I'll have to completely change my capstone focus, but as of now, that is where we're at. And these are my references from my literature review. We'll scroll through these. I enjoy looking at everyone's references. I've been able to reference mine. I've already got a few things. I've referenced mine from other articles I've pulled as well, kind of for the future. And thank you for your time. Good evening, afternoon.